My child, stop what you are doing right now and listen to me. Do not scroll. Do not distract yourself. Do not treat this moment as ordinary because it is not. What I am speaking to you now is not delayed, not recycled, not accidental. You were not brought here by chance or habit. You were drawn here intentionally, even if you do not yet understand why. I need your full attention, because what I am about to say is meant to interrupt the story you have been telling yourself in silence. Breathe. Still your thoughts. Let the noise around you fade, because this moment requires your presence. I know you have been carrying questions you do not speak out loud. I know you have wondered whether what you lost is gone forever, whether time has erased what once mattered, whether you missed your moment. I am speaking now to stop that spiral before it roots itself any deeper. This message is not about revisiting the past for nostalgia. It is about reclaiming truth in the present. What you lost has not defined the end of your story, even though it felt final when it happened. I saw the moment everything shifted. I saw the confusion, the disbelief, the way your heart tried to make sense of something it was not prepared to lose. Do not rush through this. Do not skim with your mind while your heart stays guarded. What you are about to hear is meant to reframe your pain, not dismiss it. I am not asking you to be strong right now. I am asking you to be honest. Honest about what hurt. Honest about what changed you. Honest about the weight you have been carrying quietly while life expected you to keep functioning. Listen to me carefully. I am not distant from your experience. I am not observing from afar. I am speaking to you now because I have been with you all along, even in the moments you thought you were alone. Stay with me here. What unfolds next requires your trust, your attention, and your willingness to listen without defense. My child, I want you to settle into this moment and hear me without rushing ahead, because what I am about to speak touches the place where your heart learned to ache. I know the loss you carry. Not the version you explain to others, not the simplified story you tell when someone asks how you are doing, but the real loss, the one that altered you quietly. I was there when it happened. I was present when what you loved slipped beyond your reach, when something you were counting on dissolved without warning, when your future suddenly felt unfamiliar. You did not imagine the weight of that moment. You did not exaggerate its impact. It mattered, and it mattered deeply. I need you to understand this first, because healing cannot grow where your pain has been dismissed, even by yourself. I saw the instant your heart dropped, the pause where everything inside you went silent before the thoughts began to race. I saw you try to stay composed, to make sense of what was happening while something precious was being removed from your life. I saw the way you replayed the moment afterward, wondering if there was something you missed, something you should have said differently, some action that might have changed the outcome. You have carried that questioning longer than you realize. You told yourself that time would dull it, that moving forward meant not looking back. But the truth is that unacknowledged pain does not disappear. It waits. And it has been waiting for this conversation. You lost more than an event or an outcome. You lost a sense of safety, a version of yourself, a confidence you once held without effort. Some of what was taken was obvious to others, but much of it happened internally, where no one thought to look. You adjusted outwardly while something inside you stayed frozen at the point of loss. I saw the nights when you lay awake, staring into the dark, feeling the absence more loudly than the noise of the day ever allowed. I saw the moments when you smiled out of habit, while your heart felt disconnected from the world around you. None of that escaped my attention. Hear me clearly now. Your loss was not small just because others survived similar things. Your pain does not need comparison to be valid. I am not impressed by how quickly you functioned afterward, nor disappointed by how deeply it affected you. I am not asking you why you didn't bounce back faster, or why it still hurts when you thought it shouldn't. I understand that loss reshapes the way you trust, the way you hope, the way you attach. It leaves an imprint, and pretending otherwise only delays the work that must be done. You have wondered whether losing that relationship, that opportunity, that season of life, meant you were forgotten or overlooked. You questioned whether my silence during that time meant distance. But silence is not absence. Silence is not indifference. There are moments when I remain quiet not because I am uninvolved, but because what is forming within you cannot be rushed by explanation. You assume that if I were truly present, I would have prevented the loss altogether. But presence does not always look like prevention. Sometimes it looks like endurance, like strength that holds you together when everything familiar collapses. I did not look away when it ended. I did not turn my face when the door closed. I was there in the room where the conversation shifted. In the moment the realization set in that things would not return to how they were. I was there in the aftermath, when you tried to reorient yourself and found that even simple decisions felt heavier than before. You were not abandoned to figure it out alone. You were accompanied, even if you could not feel it emotionally at the time. You thought abandonment would feel loud, dramatic, unmistakable. But what you experienced was something else entirely. You were still breathing when you thought you might break. You were still able to stand when you felt hollowed out. You were still reaching for meaning, even when hope felt fragile. That continuation was not accidental. It was evidence of my nearness. I was sustaining you at a level deeper than feeling, deeper than clarity. I was anchoring you when you could not anchor yourself. Do not confuse unanswered questions with rejection. I do not measure my care for you by how smooth your path appears. I measure it by how faithfully I remain when the path becomes unclear. You wanted assurance through outcomes, but what you were given was endurance through uncertainty. You wanted relief, but what you received was preservation. And preservation is not passive. It requires constant attention, even when it goes unnoticed by the one being preserved. You have interpreted the loss as proof that you trusted wrongly, hoped foolishly, or believed too much. But the pain you feel is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of sincerity. You invested your heart fully, and that capacity to invest did not disappear when the loss occurred. It is still part of you. You have been tempted to close yourself off, to reduce your expectations, to protect yourself by withholding. But I am not calling you to shrink in order to survive. I am teaching you how to remain open without being destroyed. There were reasons I did not remove the pain instantly. There were things forming in you that could not develop in comfort alone. This does not mean I delighted in your suffering or dismissed your tears. It means I saw further than the moment allowed you to see. You were asking me to restore what was familiar, while I was preparing you for what would be more aligned, more sustainable, more true to who you are becoming. Holding on to what was lost would have eventually limited you, even if it felt safer than the unknown. Protection does not always feel like shelter. Sometimes it feels like interruption. Sometimes it feels like loss. But love remains love even when it wounds temporarily. I did not allow the loss because I stopped caring. I allowed it because I cared deeply enough to prevent future harm you could not yet perceive. You were asking me to preserve something that would have cost you more than you were meant to give. I know you struggle with that explanation. I know part of you would rather believe the loss was meaningless than accept that it served a purpose you did not choose. But purpose does not require your permission to exist. It unfolds regardless of your understanding. What matters now is that you do not let pain redefine who I am to you. I am not distant. I am not indifferent. I am attentive, intentional, and deeply involved, even when my methods challenge your expectations. As we move forward, carry this truth with you. I was with you when it happened. I am with you now as you remember it, and I will remain with you as its meaning continues to unfold. Your story did not end at the point of loss. It paused there so I could meet you in the place you least expected to encounter me. My child, now that we have stood together in the truth of what you lost, I need to speak to the weight you have been carrying since then, the one you rarely acknowledge but feel constantly. It is the burden of responsibility you placed on yourself, the quiet belief that if you had been wiser, stronger, more discerning, or more prepared, the ending would not have happened. This belief has followed you into new spaces, shaping how you see yourself and how cautiously you move through life. I want to remove it, because it does not belong to you. Not everything that ended did so because you failed. Some things ended because they were never fully yours to hold together in the first place. You have replayed conversations, decisions, and moments with the clarity of hindsight, judging your past self with the insight you only gained later. You forget that at the time you were operating with limited information, limited energy, and a heart that was doing its best to survive and care at the same time. You have been harsher with yourself than I have ever been with you. You took responsibility for outcomes shaped by other people's choices, shifting circumstances, and foundations that were already unstable long before you noticed the cracks. Carrying that responsibility has not made you wiser. It has made you tired. Hear me clearly. Accountability and self-punishment are not the same. Growth does not require you to accuse yourself endlessly. You believed that if you blamed yourself, you could maintain some sense of control over the pain. If it was your fault, then maybe you could prevent it from happening again. But control is not the same as healing. And blame, when misplaced, does not protect you. It traps you. You have been living under a narrative that says you are the common denominator in every loss. That story is incomplete, and it is time to release it. Some people walked away because they chose differently, not because you were unworthy of staying for. Some opportunities dissolved because timing shifted beyond your influence, not because you lacked effort or faith. Some situations collapsed because they were built on fragile ground, and no amount of devotion on your part could have stabilized them forever. You were not all-knowing. You were not emotionally invincible. You were not healed in every area yet, and I do not fault you for any of that. I do not hold you accountable for what you could not see or for what you were never taught. You have confused responsibility with maturity. You thought carrying the weight proved strength, but true strength knows what does not belong in its hands. You do not need to carry what was never yours to sustain. Let go of the idea that you could have single-handedly saved what was unraveling. Some endings happen not because someone failed, but because a season reached its limit. When something has run its course, forcing it to continue only delays inevitable pain. Releasing it allows clarity to enter. As we move forward, I need you lighter, not heavier. Restoration cannot fully reach you while your hands are clenched around false guilt. Open them. Release the accusations you have rehearsed against yourself. Release the belief that every loss is a verdict on your worth or competence. You are not broken. You are learning. You are becoming more discerning than you were before. And discernment often comes through disappointment, not avoidance of it. Now let me take you deeper. Because once misplaced guilt is released, understanding can finally take root. Some of what you lost was not taken from you. It was removed for you. I know that truth can feel uncomfortable, even painful, because removal rarely feels kind while it is happening. When something is cut away, it feels abrupt, unfair, and destabilizing, especially when you were still invested in hoping it would improve. But pruning is not destruction, it is preparation. You were carrying attachments that could not grow with you into what you are becoming. If they had remained, they would have drained your strength, narrowed your vision, and restricted your future in ways you could not yet see. You were loyal to things that were no longer life-giving, holding on out of familiarity, fear, or obligation rather than alignment. Your heart was sincere, but sincerity alone cannot sustain what has become misaligned. I removed what was quietly harming you, even when you did not recognize it as harm. What was pruned served a purpose for a season. It taught you, shaped you, and revealed parts of yourself that would have remained hidden otherwise. Its removal does not dishonor the role it once played. It honors the fact that seasons change. What helps you at one stage can hinder you at another if it stays too long. I am not erasing your past. I am clearing space for your future. You questioned my timing. You wondered why the separation had to be so final, why there was no gradual transition, no softer ending. But some things cannot be loosened slowly without causing greater damage. Some patterns must end decisively so they do not re-establish themselves under a different name. You asked me to help you grow, to take you further, to use your life with greater purpose. Pruning is the answer to that request, even when it feels like loss. Growth requires light, and light requires space. What was removed was blocking that light from reaching parts of you that needed to strengthen. The emptiness you feel now is not a void meant to frighten you. It is space being prepared. It may feel exposed, unfamiliar, even lonely at times, but it is necessary. You cannot build something new on top of what has already exceeded its capacity. Grieve what was removed, but do not confuse grief with regret. You do not need to return to what was pruned to prove it mattered. Its impact is already part of you. As you stand here now, lighter in some ways and more aware in others, trust this process. Vulnerability often precedes strength. Exposure often precedes clarity. What feels like loss is often alignment taking shape. Carry this truth with you as we continue. You were not punished. You were prepared. You were not abandoned. You were protected. And now, with false guilt released and space created, you are finally positioned to understand why the next season could not begin until this one ended. My child, now I want to speak to the season that followed the loss, the one you struggled to name, the one that felt empty, quiet, and disorienting. This is the season you feared the most, because it felt like nothing was happening while everything inside you was being rearranged. When the noise faded and the familiar structures were gone, you felt exposed, as if you were standing in a wide open space with no clear direction. You wondered if this stillness meant you had been forgotten, if the silence was evidence that I had moved on to something else. But listen to me carefully now. What you experienced was not abandonment. It was an invitation. Your life had been crowded, not only with chaos, but with comfort, routine, expectation, and voices that constantly told you who to be and how to move. Even good things can become so loud that they drown out discernment. My voice was always there, but it was competing with urgency, with obligation, with fear of disappointing others, with the pressure to maintain what you had built. So I allowed the quiet. Not to punish you, but to finally be heard without interference. Stillness is not emptiness when I am present. It is a sacred environment where clarity can form. When everything slowed, you felt restless. You tried to fill the space quickly, to replace what was gone, to distract yourself from the discomfort of sitting with unanswered questions. You mistook movement for progress and noise for life, but I was teaching you something deeper. I was teaching you how to remain present without rushing toward resolution. The quiet forced you to confront parts of yourself you had postponed addressing, patterns you had ignored, wounds you had minimized, longings you had silenced because they did not fit the pace of your life before. That was not cruelty. That was care. Healing does not begin in noise. It begins in awareness. Awareness requires space, and space often feels unsettling before it feels safe. You needed a season where nothing was propping you up externally, so you could discover what truly sustains you internally. In the stillness, you began to hear not only my guidance, but your own heart more clearly. You noticed what drained you and what nourished you. You recognized where you had been living in reaction instead of intention. That awareness is not weakness. It is maturity forming. You assumed the silence meant distance because you were accustomed to intensity. But depth rarely announces itself loudly. I was closer to you in the quiet than I ever was in the rush. I was speaking gently, steadily, without urgency, waiting for you to slow down enough to listen. Not every message comes as instruction. Some come as reassurance. Some come as correction. Some come as identity being restored piece by piece. In the stillness, I was reminding you of who you are apart from what you produce, achieve, or provide for others. You began to realize how much of your stability had been anchored in external validation, routine, or roles. When those were removed, it felt like free fall. But what you were actually experiencing was recalibration. I was teaching you that your worth does not collapse when productivity pauses, when recognition fades, or when direction is unclear. You are valuable because you exist, not because you perform. This truth needed to be established deeply, not intellectually, but experientially. And experience requires time. The quiet also taught you how to sit with uncertainty without panic. You learned how to hold questions without demanding immediate answers. You discovered that not knowing does not equal danger. Trust began to shift from being outcome-based to being presence-based. You started to sense that you could move forward without having everything mapped out. That is not passivity. That is faith taking a more grounded form. There were moments in this season when you felt lonely, when the absence of familiar connection felt sharp. But solitude and isolation are not the same. Isolation drains. Solitude clarifies. I was not separating you from life. I was separating you from noise that distorted your hearing. In that space, you were able to see yourself more honestly, without constant comparison or performance. You began to notice how your energy responded to different environments, conversations, and expectations. Discernment was being trained. You also learned how to be gentle with yourself in ways you had not before. Without constant demands, You noticed fatigue you had been overriding, emotions you had been suppressing, and needs you had been postponing. Rest became less about escape and more about restoration. That shift matters. It will shape how you move in future seasons. You are learning how to sustain yourself without burning out, how to listen before reacting, how to respond instead of constantly managing. This season may not have looked productive from the outside, but internally, foundations were being laid. You were learning to recognize my voice without needing chaos to get your attention or fear to motivate you. That is maturity. When life becomes full again, and it will, you will not lose yourself as easily as before. You will carry clarity into complexity. You will know how to return to stillness even when surrounded by noise. Do not rush to escape this memory of quiet as if it were wasted time. It was preparation. What you heard about yourself, about me, about what truly matters will guide you when decisions carry greater weight. You are becoming someone who moves with intention rather than urgency, with discernment rather than impulse. That transformation does not announce itself dramatically. It unfolds quietly, steadily, faithfully. Carry this with you. The silence did not mean nothing was happening. It meant everything important was. My child, now I want you to see what you could not see while you were inside the storm, because perspective only comes after survival. What you went through was not meant to inconvenience you. It was meant to end you. The weight, the timing, the accumulation of pressure, the way losses layered themselves one after another, all of it was designed to crush your spirit, silence your hope, and reduce you to mere survival. There were forces, circumstances, and expectations that assumed you would not recover, that you would retreat, harden, or disappear into a smaller version of yourself. And for a moment, you believed they might be right. You felt yourself bending under the weight. You questioned whether you had anything left to give, whether your strength had finally reached its limit. You experienced exhaustion that sleep did not fix, and confusion that answers did not resolve. And yet, you are still here. That alone is not insignificant. Survival is not passive. You did not endure by accident. You adapted. You learned how to keep moving even when motivation was gone and clarity was absent. On days when you felt numb, you still showed up for life in quiet, uncelebrated ways. You rose. You breathed. You continued. That was not weakness. That was defiance. I saw every tear you cried when no one else was watching. Not the tears you allowed to fall in public, but the ones you released in silence, the ones that came without sound, the ones you wiped away quickly so you could keep functioning. You worried those tears meant you were breaking, that they were evidence of instability or lack of faith. But those tears were honesty. They were your soul releasing what your strength could no longer contain. They were prayers when words failed you, and none of them were wasted. You have judged yourself for how long healing took, for revisiting pain you thought you should have moved past. But healing is not linear. It moves in waves, and each wave carried something out of you that did not need to remain. Those moments where you stared at the ceiling, sat in silence, or bowed your head without knowing what to say were not empty. They were sacred pauses. In them, pressure was released, bitterness was prevented, and your heart was kept soft when hardening would have felt safer. What you endured revealed something about you that comfort never could. You learned that your identity was not as dependent on circumstances as you once believed. When things were stripped away, you did not disappear with them. You remained. Altered, yes, but intact. You discovered that you could feel pain deeply and still function. That disappointment did not erase your capacity to love or hope. It refined it. The opposition expected you to give up on yourself, to settle for less, to believe that loss defined your future. Instead, something unexpected happened. You became more discerning,